You're now on the road beyond. I'm Todd Duplantis. Great to have you with us. Welcome to your Facebook Live. Thanks for joining me now. Right now, my co-host, Ike McFadden, every week joins us. Ike, good to see you again.
Hey, dude. How's it going?
You know, we were talking last week, so we'll catch up on what happened. You had asked me what was going to happen with the second dose of vaccine. Of course, you got your 2 doses of the COVID vaccine, and you got a bit sick off the second dose. What happened with you?
Well, interestingly enough, I got COVID, so it was so strange.
Interesting enough, you got, but then you also thought you needed to go out and buy some stock for computers, but that's a whole different story as well. You know, I have my second dose on Friday. Saturday morning, I wake up and man, I am just knocked out, tired as can be. And that lasted for about a day and a half. I took a bunch of Advil, but amazingly enough, I haven't gone out and bought any more computer products. So, or nor do I want to buy any computer stock. So there's something to say for that. So I don't know, folks, get your COVID shots if you feel so. And hopefully we can get through this COVID thing sooner or later. So Ike, we've got a great show lined up tonight. You know, a few weeks ago, before we started going live on Facebook, we had a chance to catch up with a special guest who talked to us about paranormal activity. He's world known. And our guest tonight is Loyd Auerbach. He is a paranormal ghost investigator and author, and Loyd Auerbach considers himself a generalist and educator with a focus on field investigation. He started a group network of field investigators in 1989 called the Office of Paranormal Investigations, essentially to take up the slack from JFK University Graduate Parapsychology Program.
Yeah, that's right. Loyd holds a master's in parapsychology from the JFK University, and he was appointed to the faculty of Atlantic University in 2010, and he's been teaching an online parapsychology graduate course ever since. He has been a columnist for Fate magazine from 1991 through 2004, and he's authored quite a few books, I believe.
That's right, and Loyd performs as a mentalist act as Professor Paranormal, working mainly on the college circuit. He served on the board of directors as the president of the Psychic Entertainers Association, and he's also, get this, Ike, a professional chocolatier and offers guided tasting presentations under his brand, Haunted by Chocolate. Welcome to the show, Loyd Auerbach. Loyd, it's good to see you again. Thanks for joining us on our live show.
Thanks very much for having me.
Haunted by Chocolate. Found you on Facebook. I encourage folks to find you, but you've always had a fascination with chocolate, and how did you tie that into the paranormal world?
Well, it wasn't directly tied in originally. I am a foodie, and being in the Northern California area, pretty much into wine, and got heavily into chocolate once Scharfenberger introduced really good chocolate back in the 1990s. So I happened to learn a lot about it and started doing chocolate tastings. And at one point, at a paranormal conference, actually a ghost conference up in Seattle, I met a publisher who ended up publishing my paranormal casebook, who said I should write a book on what I've learned about chocolate and how I learned it and become a gourmet. And in the process, came up for a title for that book, although that book's never really been written, called Haunted by Chocolate. All the good titles were taken, you know, passionate about chocolate, passion for chocolate, I love chocolate, all that's gone. So I figured, well, you know, I am haunted by the spirit of chocolate. And that's how eventually I got my certificate.
You know, what's the most unusual thing you've learned about chocolate in studying about chocolate?
Well, actually, as I got into it, it turned out that around the same time, which was the mid-2000s, Dean Radin at the Institute for Neurotic Sciences was doing a study on putting intention into chocolate. So actually affecting it with your mind, or having people affect it with their minds, to make the chocolate more mood elevating and energizing. And the study actually was a pilot study, but it came out overwhelmingly in favor of that kind of intention actually affecting chocolate. And then it turned out other substances as well, based on the folklore that food made with love is better for you. And apparently it is.
So at the risk of getting back to the topic of the show, now just to go back to, I understand you research this kind of stuff. What are the different kinds of apparitions that are out there that people might encounter?
Well, you know, first we have 3 basic categories for what people call ghosts or ghostly phenomena. There is apparitions, which are conscious people after death, typically, although there's some breakdown for that I'll get to in a moment. We have hauntings, or what they call on TV residual hauntings, the idea that living people leave impressions behind, and those impressions can last even after we die. And living people pick those impressions up, which is why we have haunted houses. So it's not necessarily related to death, unless the person who made the recording happens to have died since then, essentially. And then we have poltergeist phenomena, which is purely physical activity that happens, which could also be whether it's moving objects or computers and other devices going haywire, even appliances turning on and off by themselves when they're not plugged in. That comes from a living agent or a living person in the environment. And there's no other indication of apparitions or anything else there. But with apparitions, we actually also have not just apparitions of the dead, but there are also apparitions of the living. Some people who have been out of body, having out of body experiences, are seen by people as apparitions. And then there are those apparitions that happen around people who are in the process of dying. Those are called deathbed apparitions as well.
Loyd, let me ask you this about apparitions, because when you talk to people who've seen apparitions or seen ghosts, you hear different versions of what they've seen. For example, our producer, Pete, tells a story about seeing his grandfather walking into a closet. That was the first ghost he's ever seen. And he said it was a full-bodied apparition except for the feet that were missing. And then you hear of some people seeing a mist or some people seeing things that are transparent. Why do we see different forms of apparition? Does it depend on the person or the spirit?
Depends on the person. The fact is that and it really has been pretty well established that you're not seeing the apparition with your eyes. You're seeing the apparition in your perceptions. So the process is a psychic one. We have to talk about bringing ESP into this whole process of communication with spirits. When a medium talks to a spirit, it's all telepathy. So you can't bring that out, separate that thing out of there. So some people get the signal really strongly, or they're set up, their abilities, their personal inbred abilities are set up to get that kind of information visually. Some people, it doesn't seem very, very strong. Some people don't see a ghost even though somebody else is, but they hear the ghost's voice, or they smell perfume or cologne or body odor for that matter associated with that person. So it's about the receiver. But you can think about the ghost as kind of the broadcaster. The ghost is putting out all signals on all channels. It's just some of us don't get the signal, the frequency, all the channels at one time.
So let me ask you something on that note. If it depends on the person seeing it or detecting it or hearing it or smelling it, I'm sort of the skeptic in the room sometimes. I mean, how do you distinguish, if it's totally subjective, how do you distinguish that from mental disorders?
Well, first of all, I think we can pretty clearly see that the majority, there are tens of thousands of people who have ghost experiences every year, mostly people who have just died. There's not mental disorders happening with most of them, maybe a few of them. But we have lots of cases where there are multiple witnesses. So you might have 2 or 3 people seeing the same ghost. You might have somebody, again, seeing the ghost and somebody else hearing the voice or getting some other indication. There's information that can come through with communication with these apparitions that the person clearly didn't know, the witness did not know, that can be verified later on. So there's a number of different checkpoints for cases. The hardest ones for us are when someone is alone, has an experience, and there's no information in that experience that we can separate from what they already know or from guesswork. Those are a little bit more difficult, but we have patterns in those, and the patterns seem to hold just throughout the experiences. And we have experiences on record going back well over 130 years.
Loyd, let me also ask you this, because we had a guest recently on the show, and he talked about seeing ghosts of some cats he'd recently lost. Mm-hmm. And, I bought into that because that's something that's happened to me. I remember years ago when I lost a beloved cat. My wife and I talked about this separately, when after it happened. But I would see things out of my peripheral vision going by, and I said something to her, and she goes, "I've been seeing that too." How is that?
There are lots of reports of pets who have passed away, who have been seen by people. It's not an uncommon thing. It seems to be those that we are connected to emotionally, though.
Right.
So there's typically, for most apparitions, there's an emotional connection between the person who's the apparition and the person who sees them. Not for all human ones, but in general, that's the case.
So here's another question for you, and this is born out of my own ignorance. What is the difference between, say, technically a ghost and a haunting? Is a haunting specific to a location, or?
Yeah, so most of us think of the word ghost as referring to somebody who's dead and who's hanging around. Oh, that's kind of it. And let's face it, some people haunt places too, but haunting themselves are related to, we often use the term place memory, but you have to remember that sometimes living people haunt places. The TV show Cheers, Norm and Cliff haunted Cheers. In fact, the word haunt refers to a place. And we do have apparitions that tend to appear in their old house or in their favorite restaurant or bar or hotel or something connection to. But hauntings are not interactive. They don't display any sense of self-awareness or consciousness or anything more than just a recording, a playback of something that happened in that location. And it is location specific. Apparitions can move around.
Loyd, one thing I'm noticing too, and take it for what it's worth, but on the internet now, with the age of cell phones, we're seeing a lot more pictures than we ever have before, but then we're seeing some old pictures of some convincing images. Is it possible to take a picture of these apparitions, or are they all bunk, or do you believe in any of them that you see on the internet?
Well, first, I have to say that the majority of what I see on the internet is because there's literally no experience connected to it. People took a picture and they happened to see that there was something in it afterwards. We don't consider any photograph good evidence at all, unless we don't even start to, unless it's happened at a time where someone was experiencing that apparition. The only way, because these are not optical phenomena, so the only way that an apparition can theoretically show up on any image is if the apparition used what we as living people have occasionally, which is called psychokinesis. It's mind over matter. In other words, the apparition would have to intentionally affect the device. And that's literally the only way, because this is not an optical phenomenon. But most of what you see on the internet are those orb pictures, which are completely irrelevant. They're not connected whatsoever in reality to spirit activity. And the majority of them are photographic errors. They're issues of photography. And then you have the pictures where somebody took a picture of a friend of theirs and sent it to them, and it was a ghost in the picture because the person who took the picture used a ghost app, a smartphone app, to take that picture with the ghost.
Yeah.
There's an app for that?
I've had people send me pictures and I can tell them what app it was.
Wow. Well, so now you spoke about the difference between a ghost and a haunting. And again, this is my own ignorance here. What is technically speaking, what is a poltergeist? How does that fit in?
So again, poltergeist is a term, it's an old term. It refers to noisy ghosts. That's a translation. It goes back to the 16th century in Germany at the very least. And it was always used to refer to those cases in which there was physical activity, which means that everybody can see it. If you're looking in the right direction, you see it. Things are physically moving or being affected. Not necessarily related to apparitions, but of course, people in the 16th century and the 17th century didn't know any better, so they connected it all to spirits or to gods, for that matter, in some cultures. Since the early 20th century, the model had started to evolve that a living person's unconscious was responsible for this. And in the mid 20th century, actually 1958, on a case, William G. Roll and J.G. Pratt did a case and were able to take that model and really formalize it. And it's been played out since then that living people, occasionally when they're under stress, for whatever reason that person is genetically or otherwise predisposed to their unconscious actually blowing off steam, you might say, by causing physical activity around. Although in about 30% of the cases, they did a study of about 100, I think it was 106 cases, the agent actually had neurological issues that connected to the activity, as opposed to just plain old psychological stress that was there. So we don't look towards spirits for this. In fact, mediums and psychics in those cases don't pick up spirits.
Now, was I correct? And it seems like somewhere at some point I read that it was slightly more common amongst young women.
Well, the stereotype is teenage girls, and that stereotype mainly comes from Stephen King and the movie Carrie.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, 60% of the cases tend to be adolescents. So that could be, 10, 11, 12 years old through early 20s. But we've all had cases with much older people. I have two different cases. One was a woman in her 70s, another was a woman who was 80 years old.
Okay.
One thing we talked about last time, Loyd, and I found fascinating is that I know when I first did the first incarnation of this show we're doing now, it was a TV pilot about 15 years ago. And I worked with some ghost investigators. Of course, they also had one of the tools they had was a temperature gauge that would take temperatures around the room, thinking that cold spots would signify a spirit is there. And in the movies, you think, well, it starts getting cold, then the ghost appears. You smell something, the ghost appears. But from what you told me last time, that's just TV movies.
It's it's actually theatrical folklore.
Yeah.
When it comes around right down to it. There was this idea from spiritualists from the seances, mainly coming from, I think, some of the frauds in the early 20th century, that ghosts need to pull energy from somewhere to manifest themselves, to actually create a physical form, which is not what we have in apparition cases. In the early days of film, one of the ways to show that something was about to happen was spooky music. We still see that today, right? You hear the spooky music and all of a sudden, something's going to happen. Another way visually was to have the person's breath be visible, like the temperature had dropped. And this has become folklore that ghosts need this sort of thing to be there. What we find, however, is that people sometimes feel cold. We all have that cold chill sometimes. People even sometimes get goosebumps, but there's no physical temperature change. Although there are a few cases on record where temperature has dropped or changed, but not always in the negative. It sometimes has gotten warmer in the room.
So when these guys are out doing these paranormal series and they've got the temperature gauges, that's all for show and theatrics.
Well, in reality, the reason to use any bit of equipment from a scientific perspective, if people are having these subjective experiences, right? There may be some verifiable stuff around those subjective experiences, but you want to know what's going on in the environment, because the physical environment conceivably could cause people to think there's something paranormal happening, or there could be changes in the physical environment that correlate or connect to the person's experience. So using EMF meters, temperature sensors, and any number of other environmental type equipment or sensors is helpful to see if there are any patterns that relate to hauntings or relate to apparitions or poltergeist cases, and to take that going forward. That's not what we see ghost hunters doing on TV, however. They're using them supposedly to detect ghosts when there's no way that's possible right now.
Well, very, very, very interesting stuff. Tell us, what are you working on at the moment, and where can people find you online?
What am I working on at the moment? I'm grading papers and quizzes from my investigations classes for the Rhine Education Center. We have a couple of different programs specifically for field investigators, for researchers and investigators who are ghost hunters or want to go even further and investigate cases of reincarnation and such. We have a couple classes coming up, actually. So I'm working on building one of the classes right now, which is on the history of the techniques that ghost hunters have used and parapsychologists have used since the very beginning, actually before the beginning of our field. And those can be found at rhineedu.org. So that's RHINE edu.org, or just simply go to Rhine, RHINE.org, and click on the education button to find out. I'm also doing a course on the evidence for life after death and from a scientific perspective. I'm also working on finally getting my old book, A Paranormal Casebook, back out in the world. It's been out of print for a few years. It's taken me a little while because of other things sidetracking me the last couple of months. But I'm hoping to have this actually a backup on Amazon by the end of the month. I'm just kind of working through the scanned manuscript right now for that. And those are the main things I'm working on at the moment.
And don't forget about Haunted by Chocolate. You can find him on Facebook. Loyd, it's always a pleasure having you on the show. Thanks for being here for our Facebook Live audience.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on to our news of the day. Of course, here's a look at some of the weird, tantalizing, and just plain bizarre stories from our partners at the Full Spectrum Project. You can find them on Facebook as well. Okay, Ike, before we get to the news, I wanted to show a video. Did you get a chance to see the video I sent you?
I totally had a chance, but I didn't.
Okay, well, it's a creepy video. If you haven't seen it, you got to look on the live stream, folks, because it's actual masks that look like they're peeling skin off their head. Some of the most realistic masks. This was an ad that popped up on Facebook. It was so creepy, I had to get the video placed on our news just because it just creeped the hell out of me. So take a look at it, and maybe we'll order one of these masks and see if they work as they do. But you can find them on Facebook and see them in our broadcast here. But now let's move on to the news, Ike. The next story comes to us from metro.co.uk. I'm sure you're familiar with them. You know Prince Philip, he recently passed away.
I did know him. Yeah, a very nice guy.
Okay. All right. Prince Philip apparently was known as the Queen's husband, a philanthropist, a painter, a bird watcher, but he was also a UFO enthusiast. He subscribed to the Flying Saucer Review and reportedly gave his assistant to go ahead and procure UFO stories and data from the RAF. This was confirmed in a diary of his assistant, Sir Peter Horsley. In his autobiography, Ike, he wrote it. It was called Sounds from Another Room. And he went so far as to say that Sir Pete apparently was asked to bring witnesses of UFOs to Buckingham Palace to have private discussions with the Duke himself. So there you go. Apparently, according to The Sun, another great good source, the Duke's interest apparently in aliens may have been inspired by his uncle, Lord Mountbatten, who filed an official report in 1955 about a silver spaceship that they saw in the sky landing on his Broadlands estate in Romsey, Hampshire. This report was kept secret until Lord Mountbatten died in 1979. It told about a bricklayer's account who witnessed a craft landing. Then get this, Ike, a figure stepped outside wearing overalls and a helmet. He was silver as well, and the bricklayer was knocked off his bike and pinned to the ground by an unseen force. So you know that story's got to be true. And if you think aliens, what's the first thing you think?
Oh, gosh.
Guy wearing overalls.
Yeah, I was thinking, it sounds like that guy was from Iowa or something.
That's what that guy said. Anyway, that came from metro.co. Next story, though, comes to us from the Smithsonian. I've been fascinated by this incident for years. Are you familiar with the story of the hikers and then I think it's Dyatlov Pass?
Oh, is that the group of people who disappeared and then they came back and they found like a boot here and
right. So here's the story. Back in 1959, a group of 10 Russian skiers, both men and women, went off for an excursion in the slopes of the Ural range of mountains. They planned on maybe doing a little hiking, some camping, drinking a little vodka. Well, they never returned, never made it back. One of the hikers got sick along the way and stayed in a village. The other 9 went on by themselves and were never seen alive again. The mountain was known to the locals as the Mountain of the Dead, so you know this isn't going to end well for them. They set up a camp and tents for conditions which would reach blizzard level overnight and sub-zero temperatures. So the unlucky kids never returned. A search party apparently was sent out. Rescuers found their campsite. Here's what they found, Ike. 3 weeks later, when they arrived, everyone was dead. The conditions of the bodies sparked everything from theories of being attacked by aliens, maybe they were attacked by a Yeti, you know that, or even the government conducting weird lethal military experiments. The tents were in shambles. They were shredded in many cases, cut from the inside. It looked like things blew up. Some hikers were found in their underwear with fatal force blunt trauma, with injuries, and they were frozen solid. Footprints led to some bodies a mile away. They were wearing their socks and apparently died of exposure. Tree limbs were broken like people were trying to climb in them. Foul play was ruled out early on in the investigation, but no solid answer was ever found now, Ike, until now.
Let me ask you this. Has there ever been any point in your life where you've decided, you know what, I want to go camping. I'm thinking where I want to go is the Mountain of the Dead. That's never come up for me.
Never came up for me. They hiked into the snow, never returned. They found them frozen 3 weeks later, and nobody knew what happened. Well, Russian authorities have ruled out all this foul play and craziness. They're now saying the incident which happened to these unfortunate hikers was not due to a crime, but due to a rather natural occurrence, like an avalanche or slab of snow falling on them, forcing them to flee their tents in the middle of the night, hence finding them in underwear. And the guys with the broken bones, well, they had snow fall on them. That's what happened with them. The snow melted, then they were found as they were. So that mystery was solved.
Okay.
You're going to buy that, right?
Sounds perfectly reasonable to me, Todd. Yes.
I've been fascinated with this subject for years. I mean, I'm thinking it could have been military experiments, going on in the desert or going on in the mountains. That could happen. Yetis, I'd buy that, and then there was even an expert that talked about possibly a lot of UFO activity in the area. Speaking of UFOs, Ike, our next guest is on standby, and we're going to have him in the next episode.
Awesome.
So there you go. All right. Remind folks to check us out on YouTube, and we can be found on the Road Beyond Network. And we're also on Facebook, Ike.
Yeah, people should absolutely check us out on those places.
Absolutely. And you can find us on Twitter and check out our partners, the Full Spectrum Project. All right. We're going to wrap up this live show. We're going to be back in just a few more minutes. We've got Daryl Sims standing by. Check him out in the next episode of The Road Beyond. We'll be back shortly.